Hey everybody, welcome back to Shock and Schlock. I'm your host, Sergio Gillis, and today is day 19. On day 20 of my 31 days of horror reviews, I'm going to be doing 2 reviews today. Got home super late last night and I didn't want to record because it was like 11. But anyway, first one here is going to be 1989's Luther the Geek by Carlton J. Albright. Now, this is a Troma movie, but before I start this is a movie distributed by Troma that is more on the side of like Combat Shock or The Thingy versus like a Poultrygeist or The Toxic Avenger even. This is a much more serious, dark film. But anyway, the story follows really Luther, who is a like sideshow geek performer who spends time in prison after, having multiple murder convictions. And he gets released on parole after 20 years in prison. And he goes on it's described as a killing spree, but it's not really. He gets out of jail, does some weird stuff, and then gets in the back of this woman's car, gets driven to her like home / farmstead, and that's where we go from there. It becomes more of a home invasion movie. So, what do I like about this film? First off, the acting in this is really solid. It is a movie that is much more serious than I expected. I mean, the way the description of the film is, like, you think it's going to be like a slasher movie with this guy. As a geek, he bites the head off of all these chickens and drinks their blood. You think it's going to be a silly slasher movie. And while it does start out around the first 15 to 20 minutes as a more goofy, not quite lighthearted, but more of that direction sort of film with Luther, like he goes to a grocery store and he eats eggs raw and is like cracking the mouth and is being weird. And you think it's going to be just like a fish out of water, silly horror comedy movie, but it is not. The guy who plays Luther is actually really intimidating. Edward Terry is his name. He does a great job. Luther in the film is this like, he's not all the way there mentally. I mean, obviously. But he almost feels more animalistic than, like a man. He makes chicken noises instead of talking. And while this starts out silly, it actually does become pretty ominous as the film goes on. The actual like intrusion into the house and the way that he captures these people in this house and is keeping them hostage and in terror is really well done, actually. His physical performance is really good. Really, the entire cast in this is really solid, actually. The primary cast is a young woman, her mother, Luther, and the young woman's boyfriend, who's there as well. Nobody does a really good job. Nobody does like a really over-the-top performance. Everybody just kinds of delivers a realistic like portrayal of these people whose home has been invaded by this maniac. And there's not a lot of, this is a Troma movie without like the typical Troma tropes in it. And it's a movie I think was distributed by Troma. But still, this is much more in line with Combat Shock, something like that, where it's much more serious. And I think the tone of the film, for the most part, is really good as well. Really, the only problem with the tone in this is the difference between the first 15 minutes and the rest of the film. I believe it's around 90 minutes. It doesn't feel like that. It's 80 minutes. Breezes by, but the first 15 and 20 minutes make it feel like it's going to be something that it's not. And I think some people that watch this are going to be a little bit disappointed by that. If you're expecting a typical Troma, horror comedy, gross out splatter movie, you're not going to get that. You're going to get a very dark, psychological horror home invasion movie. But I do think the tone is handled really well. after that first 20 minutes. It is a bit of a jarring change there initially, but there isn't really another one like that. The music in this is also pretty good. Always fits the tone of the film, but just like that, it also fits the tone of the film in the beginning, so it's kind of silly and lighthearted. Really, the first 15 minutes of this really do feel almost like a completely different movie from the last 60, but that's really the main issue that I had with it. I don't even think the first 15 to 20 minutes is bad. I think it's actually rather good. I just wish that it was more of a steady, like, transition into where we go instead of like a jarring flip almost. It's a minor complaint. The gore in this is really good as well. It's actually a pretty brutal movie, and the gore is fairly restrained, but when it is there, it looks really good. For the most part, this is a fairly grounded film, though. And not to spoil anything, I think the ending of this is one of the darkest endings that Troma ever had. Obviously, once again, with the Combat Shock comparison, but Combat Shock is probably the darkest Troma was and will ever get with an ending. But the ending of this is pretty damn close. It's funny on paper, but when you get there, it's actually really messed up. And I think a lot of people are going to be impressed by that, like I was. The cinematography in this is very tight and claustrophobic a lot of the time. Luther is chasing people through this house, or he has them tied up, and it never feels safe. It always seems like Luther is almost this like omnipresent being in this scenario, and I think that's handled really well. Luther is legitimately intimidating, and as, you know, the main subject of the movie, it's really good to see that, like, how well he's handled. He is a force of nature, and you can, you know, he may look silly initially. He's like this balding guy with crazy eyes, and he's got metal dentures that he puts on, but as it goes on, like, Luther becomes more and more of a sinister being that is definitely intimidating, and I just really enjoyed that. I think the film's paced well. Music always fits the tone, even when there's an issue in the beginning. Acting, the gore, cinematography, everything, this is really just top notch. This is a film that I think if you're going into it with the expectations it's going to be a traditional Troma movie, you might be disappointed by. But if you're going into this expecting more of a dark, like, mean-spirited home invasion thriller horror, you will enjoy this quite a bit. Definitely impressed me. It's on Tubi. There's Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray as well. Highly recommend just checking this out, whichever way you can. That's it for Luther the Geek. It's a good one, so yeah, check it out. As always, I've been your host, Herschel Gillis, signing off for today. 0 thoughts, 0 editing, 0 planning, and 0 brain cells. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't. Keep your notifications on. I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching.